Here we go. Recording in three, two, and one.
Okay, so let me see if I got this right. It's like a laser disc or a DVD, but it's a record in a case covered in oil that I can never touch.
Yeah, I have no fucking idea on this. Welcome to episode 259 of Nerdery Murdery.
Big 259, I'm Zig with your nerdery.
And I'm Jeffrey with your Murdery. Welcome to another week of the highs and lows, the ups and downs, the good and the bad, and the nerd and the murd. Have you been following this story of the missing scientists? Missing
Yeah,
or
a little
dead
bit.
scientists?
Yeah, a little
That's
bit.
weird.
It's very James Bond.
Very.
Very James Bond. Scientists all over the world are just going missing.
Yeah. And apparently the Fed is looking into this now about the whether they're all connected or not, but it's like 10, 12, something like that.
Yeah, something like that. And
Um,
it's not just one scientific field, it's a bunch.
yeah, but they're all involved with um, classified research,
Oh.
mostly in propulsion systems,
Oh. Huh.
which I think is very, very interesting.
Huh.
So I don't know.
They're
I don't know.
building a warp engine.
I don't know.
They're they're off someplace building a warp engine.
There was an interesting editorial I read this morning on it, just about the commonalities between them and whatnot. But yeah, it's pretty wild. Pretty wild. I didn't know if you'd been watching that. Um,
Yeah. Nobody's
switching.
really talking about it either. That's kind of creepy.
I mean, I've been seeing it on the news or well, news blurbs. I don't watch the news anymore. I I
Yeah.
get my news blurbs through Facebook doom scrolling now, which is sad. Um, but anyway, I was just curious. I finally sat down and got through the Gatwa Doctor Who's.
Uh-huh.
Um, I immediately liked him.
Isn't he
Immediately.
great?
He's fun. He annoyed Chelsea at first.
Hmm.
Didn't annoy me at all. I thought he was great. I thought he was a great take on the Doctor Who character. I can't wait till we talk about it because, like I said, I just recently got through it. I loved every episode, every single episode. I not a single one was down for me. I thought the writing was great.
Yeah.
So can't wait till we talk about that. So anyway, I
Yeah.
wanted to let you know. Um, I did want to give a shout out real quick to our listener, Karen. She's a very dedicated listener. Don Perry, his wife, that we've had Don on the show. Karen's been a very dedicated listener of ours, and not only is she a dedicated listener, I really wanted to give her a shout out because she will wear nerdery murdery stuff when she
Yes,
goes
she
out. She'll
will.
carry the cup. She has carried my book into stores. She loves telling people how she knows us and that they need to listen to the show. So I really wanted to give her a shout out. She got an opportunity to be an extra in an upcoming Taylor Sheridan show.
Oh yeah, I heard about this.
Yeah. She sent me the link that if I was interested in doing it, and I told her, I said, no, not really. That's not my bag. I appreciate it, but no. But really cool for her. But I really want to give her a shout out. I think I've mentioned stuff she's done before, but I want to give her a shout out because she really does pump up the show, and I appreciate that. And that's what, Nerder and Murdery merchandise does. That's free advertisement for us, and she loves doing it. So wanted to give her a real quick shout out.
Thank you, ma'am.
The last thing that I had, I talked about it last week, but just a reminder, we do have four albums, or excuse me, we have three albums out there. I have four albums because I did one for Prime numbers, but we have three albums out about the show. We have the soundtrack one and two, which is all theme song that we have done at the end of our show instead of our normal open music, which we've kept, except for Halloween. That has a different one.
Yeah.
But our normal show, we've got the end music, and the end music typically is tied to the nerdery side. Try to do it to focus on that. So give them a listen. Soundtrack Volume One and Two, and then Signals and Shadows is a progressive rock journey through the show from turning on the mics all the way through the end, and I think there's some really cool stuff out there. They're all out there on Spotify, on Apple, on iHeart.
Yeah.
pretty much anywhere you can get your music, Apple Music, you can find it there. And then my soundtrack for prime numbers as well. I'm also working on a soundtrack for the Darkwind Paradox, which is a much darker album. Uh, it's a much darker book, but give them a listen. I think they're really cool. So
Well, of course
anyway,
it's a darker book. It's in the title.
yes, yeah. Well, somebody that has read Prime Number saw my book cover for the Darkwind Paradox recently, and they said, "Wow, that looks kind of dark." And I said, "Yeah, it is. Not gonna lie to you, it's a much darker book."
Kind of the point. The dude's crazy.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. If you want to find out why Darkwind's crazy, read the Darkwind Paradox. You'll find out. So,
I can tell you he's a lot of fun to play.
all right, you got anything for us? You want to step over to the nerdy side of the house?
I did want to say that I got reached. So, someone reached
Some
out
worked
to
out.
me
There you go.
the other day. When we were doing when we were on hiatus, we did a Just Murdery episode or Just Nerdery episode about the Channel 27 Film Vault and Svengoolie. And one of the hosts of Channel 27 Film Vault reached out to me. The other host had tagged him and said, "Oh my God, you have to listen to this." So he did say he would be open for an interview. We're going to try to set that up at some point. But it is very surreal to me. It is very surreal to me because it's like when I was the preteen, those guys were the funniest guys in town to me, and I loved their show. And it existed for like a year and a half, and then it was
hmm
gone.
hmm
Um, but it's so amazing that these guys were impressed that we brought it up. And it's like, well, of course we brought it up, and it got me to thinking, well, I mean, stuff like this has an effect on people
hmm
years down the road, and I hope people derive as much joy out of this as I derived out of that. That's kind of
Oh,
why we do it.
100%. I have reached out to multiple musical artists in the indie list that we have covered and said, "Hey, just wanted to let you know we talked about you on our show. Give it a listen. Let people know, hey, we got mentioned on a podcast." So yeah, it does hit people, and I agree with you. I think it's really cool. Zig forwarded me the email, and I was like, "Wow, that's pretty wild."
Yeah,
So
yeah, I
I, I
know.
I think it'll be cool. I look forward to
I can't
to
believe he
to
sent me
doing that
his
interview.
phone number. I mean, that's surreal.
I think it's
He's like, "Give
great.
me a call."
I think it's
What?
great. I can't wait till you call and we set this up. It'll be a special show. We'll do a just nerdery for it. Um,
Yeah.
we'll
They will
do
probably at some point it will probably be out before this episode airs. Maybe not. I don't know. It
maybe it
depends on
depends on
scheduling.
yeah, it depends on what their scheduling is too. So
Yeah, because
we'll see.
essentially this just happened, and I'm kind of floored by it. But yeah,
Yeah, yeah, it's
yeah.
really cool,
So
exciting, really really
thank you,
exciting
sir.
stuff. All right,
Uh,
your show,
okay, so we're going to talk about SelectaVision today.
which I think is really funny. I think I talked about this last week. I don't remember now. I like I said, I tend to black out sometimes when I'm doing this. Um, we talked about this week because I do graphics for every episode that focus on the nerdery, just like the end theme songs. I do it focused on the nerdery side because I really don't want to do a graphic on the nerdery because or on the murdery because that would be kind of beyond dark,
Yeah.
a little bit beyond. So I focus on the nerdery. But anyway, so I was putting the graphic together for this one and I had to research because I was like, I don't even know what the hell this thing is. So this is all
Do
Zig.
you not remember these things?
I do not. I do not remember in the least little bit. Even once I got the picture, I was like, no, I have no idea. Uh, it looks like this big box that you put a CD-ROM in. So anyway, it's all yours.
The capacitance electronic disc, or CED, is an analog video disc playback system developed by RCA, Radio Corporation of America. in which the video and audio could be played back on a TV set using a special stylus and high density groove system similar to a phonograph record. First conceived in 1964, the CED system was widely seen as a technological success, which was able to increase the density of a long playing record by 2 orders of magnitude. Um, you'll see this. They now sell like what they call 180 gram vinyl um, for records now, because LPs are making a comeback. And what it is, it's a denser material, so the sound lasts longer. They're heavier too. Um, but despite this achievement, the CD system fell victim to poor planning, various conflicts with RCA management, and several technical difficulties that slowed development and stalled production of the system for 17 years until 1981, by which time it had been made obsolete by laser video disc, DiscoVision, later called LaserVision or Laserdisc, as well as Betamax and VHS video cassette formats. Sales for the system were nowhere near projected estimates, and in the spring of 1984, RCA announced it was discontinuing player production, but continued to produce the production of video discs until 1986, losing an estimated $650 million in the process. RCA had initially intended to release the SKT 425 CED player with its high-end Dementia system in late 1984, but canceled CED player production prior to the system's release. The Dementia system was basically their first foray into what we would call today a smart TV. It was basically a television system, and usually they were in consoles. They did have some non-consoles, but most of the units they sold were console systems. And at the back of them, they basically had an audio tuner and these special, we had a laser disc and a VCR that you plugged in to the back of these units, and they were way more compatible already because they used RCA jacks, and a lot of people weren't using those yet in 1984. So it was a really high-end audio video system, akin to a smart television that we see today, only big and heavy. But they were going to do one of these CEDs for it, but they discontinued the CEDs before they did the Demencias. The format was commonly known as video disc, leading to confusion with the contemporaneous laserdisc format. Laserdiscs are read optically with a laser beam, whereas CED discs were read physically with a stylus. Similar to conventional phonograph record, the two systems were incompatible. RCA used the brand name SelectaVision for the CED system, a name also used for some early RCA brand VCRs and other experimental projects at RCA. The video high density system is similar to the CED, and they were both compatible with each other. So they started developing this system in '64 in an attempt to produce a phonograph-like method of reproducing video under the name DiscPix. Research and development was slow in the early years, as the RCA CED team originally consisted of only four people. But by 1972, the CED team had produced a disc capable of holding 10 minutes of color video. They used a portion of the Get Smart episode, A Tale of Two Tales, retitled Lumfong. The first CED prototype discs were multi-layered, consisting of a vinyl substrate, nickel conductive layer, glow discharge insulating layer, and a silicon lubricant top layer. Failure to fully solve the stylus disc wear and manufacturing complexity forced RCA to seek simpler construction of the discs. The final disc was crafted using PVC blended with a carbon to make the disc conductive. To preserve stylus and groove life, a thin layer of silicon polysiloxane or methyl alkali siloxane was applied to the disc as a lubricant. So basically, it was a silicon lubricant or silicon-based lubricant that they coated these things in. But they were originally just going to put them in jackets, and you handled them like you did a LP. The problem was they had to be coated in this fluid so it would get on your hands, and also dust would get into them. And during testing, it caused it to skip a little bit. So Um, what they did was they put it in this plastic caddy, and what the plastic caddy was a big square. Um, it was a rectangle kind of. No, it was a square. Big plastic caddy, a little bit bigger than an LP, and it was fully contained. And what you would do is you would take your plastic caddy and you would stick it up to the machine itself. It would pull the disc out and play it from there. And when you were done, you pop the caddy back in and it would automatically load the disc back in. Now you put the caddy into the player about a quarter of an inch, so the disc never existed outside of the unit or the caddy. Um, it was always controlled, and there was lots of really great dust cover or uh, almost like weather stripping around where you put the caddy in. So dust never could get in there. So as long as you kept your caddies in relative safety and didn't ever take the thing out, they would be fine and play for years. And they still play today. Um,
Can you actually find one of those things today? You know what? Go
yeah,
ahead. I'm gonna look up eBay.
yeah, you could check our YouTube page. They're out there. Um, they're hard to come by. Usually the problem isn't with the discs so much as the players, because it is 40-year-old technology.
Looks like the average on eBay is between 250 to $500.
Yep,
Man,
for
there's
working ones.
several of them. Wow, this one
Uh,
for 400 is the video disc player and 19 movies.
there you go. Yeah. They went on sale on March 22nd, 1981, again, after they'd released VCRs and Laserdisc. A catalog of approximately 50 video disc titles were released at the same time. The first title to be manufactured was Race for Your Life, Charlie Brown. 15 months later, RCA released the SGT 200 and the SGT 250 players, both with stereo sound, while the SGT 250 was also the first CED player model to include a wireless remote control, and models with random access were introduced in 1983. Um, there were a lot of problems that kind of doomed the CED system before it was ever released. The introduction of VCRs and home videotape in the mid 1970s. They had longer storage capacities and recorded capabilities posed a major threat to the system. However, development of CED continued. With the forthcoming system was formally announced in late 1979. RCA had projected annual sales of between 5 and 6 million players and 200 to 500 million video discs. The company had expected to sell 200,000 players by the end of 1981, but only sold about half that number. And there was little improvement in sales through 82 and 83. The extremely long period of development, caused in part by political turmoil and a great deal of turnover at the high management of RCA, also contributed to the demise of the CED system. RCA had originally slated 1977 as the release date for the video disc system, and at that point, discs were not able to hold more than 30 minutes of video per side. So it kind of, that would have shot them in the foot. As it stands, they only hold about 60 minutes a side. So you would put your caddy in, play the movie, it'd play up to 60 minutes. It would say you need to flip it over, put your little caddy in, take it would load it back up into the system. You would flip the caddy over and it would pull it out or put it back in. Later systems uh, got around that by having the reader also on the bottom, so you didn't have to take it out and put it back in. It would just play the whole movie. You'd have like a pause in the middle. But many popular films such as the James Bond series, Mary Poppins, Star Trek the Motion Picture, and Return of the Jedi had to be released on two CEDs because they were slightly longer than 120 minutes. RCA had projected that by 1985, CED players would be in nearly 50% of American homes. That did not happen. Less than a year after RCA management realized that the system would never be profitable, and on April 4th, 1984, 3 years after they released it, announced the discontinuation of production of CED players. Remaining stock players were sold by dealers and liquidated retailers for as little as $20 each. This is how they really got into a lot of people's homes. Unexpectedly, demand for the video discs themselves suddenly became high immediately after the announcement. RCA alerted dealers and customers that video discs would continue to be manufactured and new titles released for at least another 3 years. The discontinuation of players less than a year after this announcement, and the sale of discs began to decline, prompting RCA to abandon video disc production in 1986 after only 2 years. The last titles released were The Jewel of the Nile by CBS Fox Video and Memories of Video Disc, a commemorative CED given to many RCA employees involved with the CED project, both in 1986. Um, so why get this thing instead of a VCR? Because the quality's better and they're cheaper. They were cheaper before they went down to $20. They were still considerably cheaper. And the unit, the medium itself was considerably cheaper. Because it was on vinyl, the studios lowered the cost of the film. So, and you can even get these things at rental stores at one point. CD players from an early point of their life appeal to lower income markets more than VHS, Betamax, and laser discs. The video quality was com comparable or better than VHS SP standard player or Betamax 2 video, but subpar compared to Laserdisc. But the difference was very close. So if you didn't have a fairly high-end television, you couldn't tell the difference. They were intended to be low cost because around half they cost about half as much to manufacture as a VCR. They had fewer precision parts. The discs themselves could be inexpensively duplicated, stamped out on slightly modified audio LP record presses. The main cost on them was the caddies and the lubricant. The actual discs themselves were cheap. Um, CEDs were disc-based systems. They did not require rewinding. Early discs were available only in monophonic sound, but many later discs were issued in stereo sound. Um, Mono CED discs were packaged in white protective caddies, while the caddies for stereo discs were blue. So most of them you will see will all be in blue. Other discs could be switched between the two separate mono and audio tracks, providing features such as bilingual audio capacity. Like the Laserdisc and DVD, some CEDs featured random access, allowing users to quickly move to certain parts of the movie. Each side of a CED disc could be split into up to 63 chapters or bands. Two late RCA players, the SJT400 and the SKT400, could access these bands in any given order. Unlike its laser-based counterparts, the chapters in a CD are based on minutes of the film, not scenes. So, I'm going to borrow the Podback machine real quick. It's about 1982-ish, and I go over to a friend of mine's house. He would stay with his mom in the summer, and he's like, "Hey, we're gonna watch Poltergeist tonight," and I'm like, "Oh, cool! I didn't know it was playing at the movies." He's like, "No, no, no, just come over." So I came over, and his stepdad Ronnie, who was my neighbor, grabs this disc, puts it into this little machine. It pulls it out of the little caddy, and he puts the caddy to the side, and he starts playing it, right? And we're watching it, and he's like, "Oh, hold on," and he paused it and went and got something and went to the bathroom, came back, got himself something to drink, sat down, unpaused it, and the movie started back where it was at. And then uh uh Pat, Ronnie's wife, went to go into the kitchen to go get something and came back. She's like, "Hey, back it up." So he goes back a chapter. I witnessed all of this stuff in like 1982. I was flabbergasted. We didn't have a VCR yet, right? You want to go to the movies, you go to the movies. Or you caught them on TV and they were all cut up and edited. And it was like, well, the movie must have been super expensive. Like, no, no, these things are way cheaper than, and they said VCRs. And I was like, oh, okay. I was not that familiar with VCRs. I knew they existed, but like I didn't know the difference between a VHS and a Betamax. I didn't learn that until probably the next year. But it was amazing to me that they could do this thing, and that's the first time I'd ever seen one. They kept their VC or their CED player in their living room. And I think eventually they added a VCR to it, but they still had that CED well into the late 80s. And I want to say even like 1990, 1991. They still had it and still played it. And they liked it because they could skip chapters. Whereas with a VCR, you couldn't really do that. Some of the disadvantages are mostly in comparison to Laserdisc technology. CD suffered from the fact that they were a phonograph style content media. RCA estimated the number of times a CED video disc could be played back under ideal conditions was about 500. By comparison, a clean laser rot free laserdisc could in theory be played an unlimited number of times, although repeated or careless handling could still result in damage. Since the CED system used a stylus to read the discs, it was necessary to regularly change the stylus in the player to avoid damage to the video discs. While worn and damaged discs could cause problems for consumers, when a disc began to wear, video and audio quality would severely decline. There was also an adjustment knob. It is generally on the bottom of the machine. So the best way to adjust it, because you could open the machine up and change out the stylus pretty easily. It was like a cartridge, just like a record player stylus, because I've seen it happen. But once you put it in, you had to throw in a disc you didn't care about and adjust it. So there's a little adjustment knob, but it is generally directly on the bottom of the system when you can't get your hand under there. So what most people would do is put it on, something raised, where you can like four milk crates with a space in between them so you could adjust it. Um, but once you got it adjusted, it stayed that way, as long as nobody bumped the adjustment knob. Um, but it would skip a little bit. Um, and it did again. It required a disc flip early on. They got around that problem after a while. They couldn't freeze frame, but they could go back and forth between chapters, and you could fast forward and rewind. Mostly people just use the chapters. Um, they were larger than VHS, and they were thicker than laser discs, and they were considerably heavier due to the plastic caddy and all of that coating. Um, they did release a couple of basically like VCR games. Do you remember the VCR games? Yeah, yeah. Where you would play on. They had some of those on CED. They also had some of those on Laserdisc as well. We've talked about them. Where you would play the game and there would be like a board game or something happening, and then something would happen on the movie, and you'd stop it, and it would affect the outcome of the game. They did do some of that stuff. It was pretty cool. But again, these things were meant to be less expensive than a VCR, and way less expensive for a laser disc. So that was their big selling point. And again, they didn't sell very well, but they didn't sell nothing either. The first year they sold 100,000 units. And they continued selling well, and the uh the discs themselves sold very well. Um I, the technology was pretty interesting. Um eh, they're conductive. So it is a vinyl platter, but it does conduct electricity to avoid they have a spiral groove on both sides. The groove is 657 millimeters wide. It has a length of up to 19 uh, km or 12 microns. The disc rotates at a constant angular speed during playback at 450 RPM, which is pretty fast for a record. That's
Yeah,
also
no
why they
kidding.
made them. Yeah, that's also why they made them more robust because you spin a record that fast, it's going to break. Um, Each rotation contains 8 interlocking fields and 4 full frames of video. These appear as spokes on the disc surface, with the gap between each field clearly visible under certain lights. So if you do take it out, you can look at it, see how it's constructed. But once you take it out of that caddy, you've basically ruined it. You can get it put back in, you can get the stuff coated back on it, but any dust that gets on them is a problem. Again, they were able to get around that because you never actually took it out of the caddy itself. You never took it out of the caddy. You put it into the machine, which had pretty good dust coverage on it, and it sucked the disc right in with part of the little caddy around it. Um, the stylus was keel shaped. It had a tiny titanium electrode layer, and it rode in the grooves with extreme light tracking force. It had an electronic circuit was formed through the disc and the stylus itself. So instead of it just, like with a record player, it reads the grooves and the vibration is what gives you the sound.
Right.
Well, yes, this also read vibration. There was also an electronic signal that was running through it as well, which is why they needed the gel medium. Um, and there was a lot of carbon in them too to make them like a semiconductor. So it wasn't just PVC vinyl. It was PVC vinyl impregnated with a bunch of basically Bucky balls, really high end carbon. Um, but it would produce close to an FM signal. So quality wise, it was as good as VHS, the super VHS that the television stations used, and Betamax 2 that the television stations used. And it was almost as good as Laserdisc. But again, depending on the TV you're running them through, the Laserdisc and the CED might be of similar viewing quality because of the medium it's going through. And it was not a conventional phonograph record either. It was something a little more. Um, but these things were amazing. I'm surprised you never saw one because they were fairly popular. They were more popular than Laserdisc.
No, never saw one.
Yeah, that is amazing. And I know that one family had them for a long time. It was they were like the Betamax people were in the 90s. There were still people out there who had Betamax and waxed poetically about the quality of Betamax over VHS. And they were right. The Betamax is way better quality than VHS.
Yeah.
Um, but VHS was cheaper. Well, these things were actually cheaper than VHS. Again, yes, there was a liquidated prices, but they were selling these things for $20 a pop. The players, not the movies. The
Hmm.
movies were less than $20 a video or a video disc. Like 10 or 15. So they were, half the price of what you would buy at a, you know, there were places like Suncoast that when you could buy video discs, they were generally $20 a piece. These were half to three quarters of that cost. Again, because they were on vinyl. Um, and RCA made a really great deal with the film houses. They didn't see that the movie production companies did not see the CED nearly as much as of a threat as they did the uh, the VHS and the movie rental store. And at some point, the movie production houses turned a corner on that. And they were like, oh my God, this is another stream of revenue. For some reason, they always saw the CED as another stream of revenue. I, I don't know why. I mean, I can't find anything that explains why that was the case, but it just was. Um, so yeah, I mean, this is an amazing piece of technology. That I think if RCA had have released it in like 1977, it being cheaper and of a higher quality, maybe this technology would have been at the forefront as opposed to VHS tapes. I don't know. Um, I do know that the people who had it liked it and they're still available. There's a fairly large community that's into it. It's bigger than the Betamax community. Is it as big as the Laserdisc community? That I don't know. I'd say they're probably comparable. Um, but yeah, these things are just really cool. It's a cool little cul-de-sac of technology. And there's a nerdery out there for it. And you can still go and find that stuff out. Well, as you said, there's a bunch of them on eBay right now. What do you say, 400 bucks with like 15 movies? That's not a
Yeah, there was one for I think it was just under five for one plus 15 movies.
Yeah, that's not a bad little deal. And it's a cool piece of technology. Now, granted, they were made in the early 80s, so they look like they're from most of that stuff had wood grain on it somewhere.
Oh yeah.
Even if it was just a sticker. It wasn't until the mid 80s we decided that silver and black were cool. But yeah, that's about it for the CED. Unless you had some questions.
No,
Yeah. Yeah,
no.
yeah. What it shocks me is I can't believe because again, these weren't necessarily rare. They were or they were uncommon,
Hmm.
but they still sold pretty well.
Yeah. No, I just never seen. I mean, not to my awareness. Maybe I saw one and just didn't know about. But no,
You didn't know what it was, yeah.
mm-mm.
Yeah, well, a lot of people got them confused with Laserdisc players too.
And that may be the thing. I may have seen somebody with one and thought it was a laser disc, and I have no idea. But I just no clue, no clue. Cool. All right. Well, thank you for that. I appreciate all talking about all the old technology. I think that's really cool to do. We've talked about several video game systems as well as video players and things like that. Um, I think to me that's fairly interesting, especially to our younger viewers, our younger listeners. We have viewers too. Um, but the people who listen to the show that aren't aware of this stuff, where everything came from,
Yep.
up to Blu-ray, which the sad thing is, whether it's sad or not, Blu-ray is more than likely the last physical media we will see.
4K. They release 4K discs now.
Well, yeah, there's Blu-ray 4K, and then there's 4K, then there's the UHD, and there's all that. I'm just talking about the current physical discs.
Oh
That's
yeah, yeah.
probably
There'll be
the
Blu-ray
last
discs.
physical.
Okay,
Yeah,
yeah, I'm with you. Okay, okay.
that's probably the last physical media because everything has gone streaming. You know, I just don't think we're going to see it anymore. They've already talked about that. Is it 8K or 12K? I think it's 8K is the last measurable improvement they can do, because your eyes can't see
Your
it
eyes can't
any
process past
can't process
8K.
it. Yeah, I can't process it, and it may be 12. I can't remember if it's 8 or 12.
Yeah.
But they're saying that the next medium is going to be immersive. Immersive and goggles and things like that. So that that's where we're headed. So I think it's cool to look back where things started and progressed to. The one thing you haven't covered, and you probably need to at some point, is the old home movie reel to reel video, uh, home movie projector.
Oh, yeah, yeah, like a 8 millimeter projector.
Yeah. There we go.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
need to cover that
Eights
at
and
some point.
16s. Yeah, yeah.
Need to cover that at some point. But anyway, thank you for that. I appreciate that.
Thank you, sir.
With that, we'll step over to the murdery side of the house.
Murder.
For today, I got my information off Wikipedia, all that's interesting, 6 ABC News, and the Texas Observer. And this is the story of Robert Ben Rhoades.
Robert Ben Rhoades.
So what you've got is a woman standing alone at a truck stop. It's late, the kind of late where parking lot lights buzz overhead and the highway never really goes quiet. Trucks roll in, trucks roll out. Strangers pass each other without a second glance. For long haul drivers, Iowa is just another stop along their route. For travelers, it's another place to stretch their legs. But for some people, it was the last place they were ever seen. Because somewhere in that parking lot, there was a truck that didn't look unusual, no flashing warning signs, no obvious danger, just another rig among dozens of others. Inside, though, was something else entirely. The cab had been modified. There were hidden restraints, tools, and a space that was designed for one purpose, control. Women would get into the truck, sometimes willingly, sometimes not. And once the door shut, the outside world disappeared. Miles of highway, no witnesses, no escape. Some victims were photographed, some were tortured, some were killed, and some were never found.
Hmm.
For years, the truck kept moving state to state, stop to stop to stop, victim to victim, and the man behind the wheel blended in perfectly because he looked exactly like everyone else. So, tonight's case is going to take us to Iowa and the story of a long haul truck driver whose rolling crime scene crossed the country, leaving fear, mystery, and victims in its wake. This is the story again of Robert Ben Rhoades. Before we dig into the details of the case, we're stepping back into our A to Z journey across America. I've gotten some comments from that on people. They're really enjoying it. So I'm glad I'm doing
Oh,
that.
nice.
Last episode, we traveled to Indiana and covered the case of Herb Baumeister. But after stepping briefly away for one standalone episode, we're now continuing alphabetically through the United States, which brings us to the next state on our list of Iowa.
Oh,
Um, this case is one that stretches far beyond a single location, because while Iowa is where this story connects for our A to Z series, the crimes themselves cross state lines, highways, and truck stops across the country. And I'm sorry if you can hear a dog. Um, Iowa just sat directly in the path. This is where I-80 and I-35 intersect. Uh, it's two of the busiest trucking corridors in the country. So this is a case that's built on mobility and isolation. And honestly, it's on the terrifying danger that sometimes travels with us. Whoops. Sorry, I apologize. There was although the listeners don't know it, we did have to take a little pause because I had a dog that was going nuts though for some reason. Um,
nutso!
but but as I was saying, this is two of the busiest trucking corridors in the country, and this is a case that is built on mobility and isolation, and honestly, of the very terrifying reality that danger sometimes travels with us without us even realizing it. Because for years, Robert Ben Rhoades lived a life that looked very ordinary. He was a long haul truck driver and he spent days and nights on the road moving freight from one destination to the other. And this was a lifestyle that gave him something very incredibly dangerous: opportunity. Truck stops are built around anonymity. I've had this feeling as I've driven across the country because I have driven. I've driven from coast to coast. Um, and I stop at a lot of truck stops. I think truck stops are really cool to stop at. I love the people seeing, and they're also generally very well lit and very populated, and they're a lot generally can be safer, but
Hmm.
they are built around anonymity. People come and go, and drivers rotate constantly. So generally, no one knows each other. No one generally remembers faces. This is a perfect environment for somebody who doesn't want to be noticed. And Rhodes understood that. He knew how to blend in and he knew how to approach strangers. He also knew that once he pulled away from the truck stop, he could be miles down the highway before anyone realized someone was missing. But what made him especially disturbing wasn't just the mobility, it was the preparation. It was what was inside his truck that he had built. He had built a built something terrifying in there.
A
He didn't
killing rig.
he did build a killing rig, and it wasn't just for transportation, it was control. He was born in 1945, and by the time his crimes began to surface, he was a middle-aged man who, by outside views, just on the surface, it appeared very ordinary. He had served in the military, he had held steady employment, and then eventually became a long-haul truck driver. And this was a job that suited him perfectly. Long hours alone, constant travel. There was no fixed schedule, no consistent community. And for most drivers, that lifestyle is simply part of the job. But for Rhodes, this is where it provided something else. It was a freedom of movement and anonymity and access to a steady stream of potential victims who were also passing through unfamiliar places. Those who knew him said he was very quiet, sometimes odd, but not necessarily somebody that stood out dramatically. And that's really what made him dangerous. He didn't draw attention to himself, he just blended in. There were signs that there was something darker beneath the surface, though. He did have a history of violent behavior and disturbing interests. There were reports of domestic abuse. There were allegations that involved restraint and control. He was known to carry weapons, and he had an interest in sadistic material that centered around domination and captivity. And it was over time that these interests would escalate because eventually these moved from fantasy into reality. At some point during this time, he began modifying his truck. What should have been a sleeping area became something else. He installed restraints, handcuffs, chains, all devices designed to hold somebody in place. So this wasn't impulsive and it wasn't spontaneous. He prepared for this. He was creating a space where he could control somebody and completely cut them off from the outside world traveling down the highway. And that's the fear that he liked instilling in people. He could restrain them in the back of his truck and keep driving, torturing them because they wouldn't know what was going to happen next. Were they going to die? Were they going to release him? Were they going to get raped? They didn't know. And once that space he created existed, it was really only a matter of time before he used it because the road gave him everything he needed: strangers, isolation, distance, and time. Um, so before long, he began turning truck stops into his hunting grounds. Um, because he was constantly traveling, pinpointing the exact beginning of his crimes is difficult. Investigators believe his attacks probably started years before he was ever caught. What we do know is that by the late 1980s, he was actively using his truck as a mobile prison. He would target women at truck stops, rest areas, and hitchhiking locations, places where someone alone wouldn't necessarily stand out, but they were places where people came and went without being noticed. Um, in some cases, the victims, as I said earlier, would get into his truck willingly, believing they were just accepting a ride. One of the most well-known victims connected to Rose is Regina K. Walters. She was just 14 years old.
Oh,
In 1990, she had been traveling with her boyfriend, Rick Lee Jones, and the two were hitchhiking through the Midwest, trying to make their way across the country. And at some point during their journey, they encountered Rhoades and they accepted a ride. What would happen next would only be fully understood later. But Rick was killed. His body would eventually be discovered in Mississippi, but Regina remained with Rhoades for days. Investigators believe she had been held captive inside the truck, restrained and controlled as Rhoades continued traveling, just as I had said before. Then in Illinois, Regina was murdered. Her body was found in a rural barn, posed in a chilling manner that suggested that she had been photographed before her death. And in fact, that's exactly what investigators would later discover. Sorry, my voice is going weird today. Um, Inside the truck, police would eventually find photographs of Regina, images that were taken while she was still alive, standing barefoot, wearing a very simple dress. Her hair was cut short, but she had an expression of absolute terror. These photographs would honestly become some of the most haunting pieces of evidence in this case because they didn't just show murder, but they showed captivity and control and the calculated nature of his crimes. Tragically, she was not the only victim. Uh, truck stops along I-80 and I-35, they really create a major corridor intersection through Iowa. That's where everything intersects. And this is where roads traveled frequently. These connect the Midwest to the rest of the country. And for a long haul truck driver, Iowa's not just a pass through, it's a major regular stop. And so one of the victims that connected to Rhoades, Candace Lee Wall, she was last seen at a truck stop in Iowa. She was 23 years old. She had been traveling and she was known to frequent truck stops along major highways. And in 1992, she disappeared after leaving a truck stop in Iowa. At the time, there were very few leads. And like many cases that involve transient travel, the case quickly went cold. But later, years later, investigators would connect her disappearance to Rhoades. His case helped establish the broader geographic scope of his crimes and reinforce the idea that he used Iowa truck stops as part of his hunting ground because, again, because of the nature of long haul truck routes, Iowa just became one of the places where victims crossed paths with him. And like the others, Candace Lee Wolf never made it home. Her name, like Regina, became part of a growing list of victims connected to a truck that was just moving across the country. And by the time authorities began piecing everything together, it became very clear that Rhoades may have committed far more crimes than were definitively confirmed. His constant travel and the anonymity of truck stops and the lack of witnesses meant many victims may never be identified. But the pattern here was clear. He used the road and the isolation and his truck as a place where victims would just disappear from the world. So by the time investigators began piecing together Rhodes's movements, that's when the pattern began to emerge. He didn't just operate in one town or one state, but he operated on the highway. Um, he was using these truck stops as the hunting ground for hitchhikers, runaways, travelers, people, as I had said earlier, would not immediately be missed, or their disappearance wouldn't be noticed right away. He would often approach women who were alone, sometimes not, but he offered them rides, and it was simply he used this opportunity when they were most vulnerable because once they were inside of his truck, that's when everything changed because that's where he could control them. He could isolate them. The truck would be moving. He'd be miles from where he had started, and there were no witnesses. He would restrain many of his victims for extended periods. He carried tools and items that investigators later believed were used to control and intimidate. He would take photographs documenting some of the victims while they were still alive. And the mobility of his job is why he became very difficult to track because a victim could disappear in one state and he could be hundreds of miles away by the time anyone realized they were missing or where they would be found. And that's the kind of movement that created gaps in timelines and in jurisdictions. And as we have said in many of these so far, gaps in communication between law enforcement agencies. This is what allowed Rhoades to continue operating. The law enforcement was just not able to connect the dots like they can today. We live in a very fortunate time where they can connect these dots fairly quickly, which is why it's going to be very difficult in this day and age to have a serial killer. We've talked about there's potentially one in Austin right now, and there's potentially one in Houston, and they say potentially because they're not sure. But communication happens between jurisdictions where they're able to try to start piecing things together.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
the Barney Five quotient it isn't really a thing anymore. People are able to respond way too quickly now.
Absolutely, absolutely. Um, so investigators later believed his crime really probably spanned multiple states across the Midwest and beyond. Some of them were connected through timing and travel routes and other similarities, but others remain suspected but not confirmed. And that's really kind of where one of the most chilling aspects of the case are. There are many victims who are never identified, connected, or found because Rhoades didn't leave a crime scene. He took it with him. For years, he operated without being caught. The mobility of his job and anonymity of truck stops and the lack of connected investigations allowed him to continue. But in 1990, everything changed. And it wasn't because of a long coordinated investigation or that somebody recognized him, but it was because of a routine patrol. There was an Arizona state trooper who noticed something unusual near a truck. And so the trooper approached the vehicle and he looked inside, and that's when the case would immediately stop and become worse because there was a woman inside. She was alive, and she was restrained, so she was being held captive. And this was Cynthia Dawn Kinney, and she had been abducted. The trooper quickly realized this was not a misunderstanding or some sex game gone wrong; that this was an active kidnapping, and so Rhoades got arrested on the spot. And inside the truck is where investigators found the stuff that I mentioned earlier, the restraints, chains, weapons, photographs, items used for control. And so that's when they realized this is not just a truck that's for transportation. This is a crime scene. And this arrest is what would unravel everything because once he was arrested, investigators began searching the truck more thoroughly, and it's what they found inside would confirm their worst suspicions. The sleeping compartment itself had been turned into something very sinister. This is where the restraints were installed. This is where items were that were designed to immobilize somebody. And this was something that was prepared in advance. The investigators also found weapons, tools, and materials that suggested he had used the truck repeatedly for captivity. But then there was the very disturbing photographs that they found. These were Polaroids, images of women, restrained, terrified, clearly being held against their will. And these photographs showed that the woman found alive in the truck was not an isolated incident. This had happened before. Among those photos were images that would later be linked to Regina K. Walters. Those photographs showed her alive, standing barefoot and visibly frightened. And the setting seemed staged and controlled. And these were the images that would become critical evidence tying Rhoades to her disappearance and murder. Investigators also began reconstructing his travel patterns through logbooks, receipts, routes, and stops. Everything was analyzed. They mapped his movements and they began matching them to missing person cases across multiple states. And this is where the scale of the investigation grew very quickly. Multiple jurisdictions were now involved, and cold cases were being reopened. Missing persons reports were being examined. And what had started as a kidnapping arrest was now becoming something much, much larger because authorities realized they're probably dealing with a serial offender who had used the interstate highway system to avoid detection. And the more they dug into his past, the more likely that seemed. Victims began being identified. Cases that had once gone cold now had a potential suspect. And investigators began building connections piece by piece. The evidence that was found inside that truck began the unraveling of what would become a serial killer. Um, After his arrest, Rhoades initially faced charges related to kidnapping, assault, and the woman they found in his truck became a critical witness, and the physical evidence only strengthened the case against him. He was convicted in Arizona for kidnapping and assault connected to that traffic stop, and he received a prison sentence. And for a while, that seemed to be the end of the legal proceedings, but investigators in other states were still working. And so, as evidence was continued to be reviewed, authorities began linking Rhoades to additional murders. There were additional photographs found in his possession, combined with travel records and witness statements, which is what connected him to Regina K. Walters. So, with that, the case moved forward in Illinois, and prosecutors presented evidence showing Regina had been held captive, photographed, and ultimately murdered. And the timeline of Rhoades' travel, along with the images recovered in his truck, is what formed a very, very powerful case. And rather than risk trial, Rhoades ultimately pleaded guilty. So he was convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. And over time, additional investigations continued examining his possible involvement in other disappearances. And while only a small number were definitively proven in court, investigators have long suspected that the true number of victims may be significantly higher. Um, because of his constant travel, many victims are probably never going to be identified. Others may remain missing. And some cases may never be conclusively tied to him. Um, and more than anything else, and it's because Rhoades would spend the rest of his life in prison. He died in custody in 2007. Um, but by that point, honestly, the damage had been done. His crime stretched across the United States, highways and years, and he left behind victims whose story only came to light after his arrest. And it really, unfortunately, left investigators with as many questions as answered because they had a killer and they had a modified truck and they had photographs, they had confirmed victims, but then they also had gaps. Because of how he operated, it's very likely that Rhoades encountered far more victims that were ever identified. The long haul trucking routes stretch across thousands of miles, and victims would disappear in one state, taken to another, bodies left in remote locations. And in a lot of the cases, there may never be enough evidence to connect those disappearances back to him. So uncertainty continues to follow this case to this day. What is known is Rhoades used his anonymity as a weapon. The truck stops, as I talked about, the rest areas and highways were places he could make people vanish without immediate notice. His mobility allowed him to avoid patterns that investigators typically rely on. And it also highlighted something very important for law enforcement. And I've talked about this in so many cases. Communications between jurisdictions matter. We have it today, but at that time, cases in different states were not easily connected. A missing persons case in one state might not immediately be linked to a suspect operating hundreds of miles away. And cases like this are what help reinforce the need for better information sharing across agencies.
Wow.
Beyond the investigative lessons, the real impact of this case really comes back to the victims. We've got Regina K. Walters, who was 14 years old, taken while traveling, held captive, and murdered far from home. Candace Lee Walsh was 23 years old, last seen at an Iowa truck stop, and she never returned. The many unnamed victims investigators may still exist, that they believe may still exist, people whose stories may never fully be told, and names that really deserve to be remembered because their lives deserve more than just being reduced to a statistic attached to a killer. Um, Behind every case like this are real people, family and friends, and futures that never happened. So as we continue the A to Z journey across America, this case brought us to Iowa, not because everything happened there, but because Iowa sat directly in its path. That was the crossways between Interstate 80 and 35, two of the busiest trucking corridors in the country.
It's basically a cross section of the United States. I was just looking at a map of it. I was
Oh,
like, oh my God, that's
absolutely.
like right in the middle.
Yeah, it's right in the middle. It's the crossway. And this is miles of highway cutting across farmland and connecting coast to coast. And for long haul drivers, it's not just a destination. This is a pass through. This is a stopping point, a place to refuel, rest, and move on. For Robert Ben Rhoades, as I said multiple times in this episode, it became his hunting grounds. People who were passing
Hmm,
through, hitchhiking, people alone, people who might not be noticed. Candace Lee
rat
Walsh
bastard.
was, yeah, Candace Lee
Rat
Walsh was
bastard.
last seen in an Iowa truck stop. This was a routine stop along the highway, the kind thousands of people make every day. And unfortunately, she never left. That's what makes this case so unsettling. And not because anything about those locations seemed dangerous. I talked about that at the beginning of the episode. I
Oh
frequent
yeah,
them
some of the
when I've
best
driven.
food on the road is in truck stops, or it
Sure.
used to be.
Well, but they also have bright lights, fuel pumps, and drivers coming and going. These are normal
Yeah,
places. And that's that's where it's so unsettling because as I read through this, I'm thinking, God, I've traveled these truck stops and I've never thought of myself in danger in one of these things
yeah.
because they're so bright and well lit. It seems like it's a safe place.
There's several. Well, I don't know anymore, but back in the day, you could take a shower and even rent like a bunk to sleep in
Most of
on
them are
long road
still that way.
trips.
Most of them.
Yeah,
You go to a pilot. Pilot loves Flying J. What others am I thinking of? There's others, but yeah,
no,
no,
you
they
just rattle
they
those
all.
right off. I'm like,
Oh,
sweet.
I know them. I've stopped at them. I look for those as I'm going along the highway to stop it. I love to stretch my legs, and like I said, for me, I love the people watching because they're generally
Yeah,
very high traffic places, no matter the time of day.
yeah. 2 o'clock in the
Um,
morning, 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
yeah. So that's really where this all became settling because sometimes danger doesn't live in a town and it doesn't stay in one state. In a case like this, it's one that moves.
Creeps
Um,
along.
and in this case, it moved along the highways of Iowa and really kind of blended in with every truck on the road. So that's my A to Z for this week and Robert Ben Rhoades.
Well, thank you, sir.
So again, I love covering these. I love that we talked with Johnny Trevisani that really gave me this idea because he did his very humorous book about serial killers across the country, and I was like, you know what, I really want to cover that. I'm not.
Johnny Trevisani.
I'm not stealing the idea for. I guess I am stealing the idea for him, but he wrote a book about it. We had him on the show, giving him lots of credit on that. But I wanted to cover it for myself because I found this very fascinating, and I've gotten information from listeners slash viewers that have found it interesting as well. So I'll keep going with this as we go along. So I appreciate you sticking around with me on that. So with that, that will take us to the end of another recording week. As always, you can find us on nerdymurdery.com. It's our hub, it's our website for everything we do. You'll find links to our book, as well as links to our books, as well as links to our YouTube page, which Zig so often update.
Yeah, check these out. There's a there's a couple of not only how these things work, but what they're all about. But there's actually an ad for one as well from the early 1981. It's peak.
And every now and then I come across an old ad that I think is so funny. Some of the older ads that used to be on the air were so much more risque than what you can put on TV now. There's one for Doritos that go out there and find, and it's where a guy he's eating some chips on a park bench. A runner comes by and he's got some crumbs on his face, and a lady comes and licks his face.
Oh
Well, he
yeah.
starts coming back and he brings another bag of chips, and this time he removes the bag and the crumbs are all over his crotch. And she looks back at him, and then this guy comes running past and shoving her out of the way goes to the guy. And it's like, are you kidding me?
This is so messed up.
It is so messed up. But anyway, um, you'll also find the link to our Patreon on our site if you wish to help with the costs that are associated with this show. It is not cheap. It is not free. It costs us for our uploads, for our storage, everything that's associated with this, so we can bring this to you each and every week. You'll also find the link to our merchandise, where you can, if you wish to buy Nerdery and Murdery Fandom, show off your Nerdery and Murdery Fandom and help us out. That, along with our patron help with the costs that are associated with the show, and that merchandise is free advertisement for us. And let's face it, you look damn good in it.
Damn good.
Damn good. One thing you can do that's completely free is wherever you can leave a 5-star review. It helps us, helps others find our content that may be looking for the information that we discuss. And last but certainly not least, to our good friend Chuck, you can go sleep now.
Good night,
Good
Chuck.
night, Chuck. With that,
I have been Zig with your nerdery.
and I'm Jeffrey with your murdering.
Cue the music.